Hey everybody, good to see everyone again. It's good to be back up here. How's everyone doing? Good? All right. It's been 2 hours since we had a self-congratulatory clap. So let's give it up again for Hope, for Chelsea Manning, for Emmanuel, for Kyle, for the volunteers, for the speaker committee, for the AV guys, for all of you for being here and making Hope what it is. It's pretty amazing. Anyhow. I'm going to tell you guys a bit of a story today, if I can get the mic down to normal human height. Okay. I want to tell a story, and like all stories, you need characters, and we're going to explore some rather interesting characters, including the president. And in order to do that, what you need to do is sort of look at them intellectually, look at their philosophies, and look at their actions. And we're going to tell a rather fascinating story about a cyber squatter that we identified through monitoring the DNS as it relates to Trump-related domain names. And in order to tell a story, you also have to set a stage. And so I think we should get on with it because we have we got a lot of ground to cover here. So let's go. So cyber squatting on the Trump campaign. Let's start off in Texas. 1948. It's hot. It's a congressional campaign. We know about this particular congressional campaign and how irritated people were, not just because they were in Texas, but we know about this particular congressional campaign because of Hunter S. Thompson. He wrote Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail in 1972, but it was about LBJ's campaign in 1948. And he was up against this guy. His name was W. Lee O'Daniels, and LBJ was a pretty aggressive campaigner, but he was up on the ropes. And he came up with this very unique idea to discredit his opponent and to slander him, to bring him down a couple of notches. And I do have to say my 5-year-old is in the room, so sweetie, you might want to hold Sasha's ears for a second. But this particular idea that LBJ had, his campaign manager balked at it and responded to LBJ like this: Christ, we can't get away with calling that guy a pig fucker. Nobody's going to believe a thing like that. But they did. That's Peppa Pig, Sasha. And LBJ's response to his campaign manager was, well, let's make the son of a bitch deny it. And that brings us to chapter 1, misinformation. So we're going to go into a little background here. So misinformation, generally it's false, inaccurate information that's intended to deceive. It's not a new concept by any means. It's basically as old as human conflict itself. It's something Sun Tzu actually wrote about. The Department of Defense defines misinformation as measures designed to mislead or manipulate, distort, falsify evidence, induce the enemy to react in a manner prejudicial to the enemy's interests. And widespread information, as we've all come to realize, is very, very difficult to counter. And that's because it's amplified by things like news outlets and amplified by things like social media, as we saw with the whole Cambridge Analytica Facebook fiasco that's been unraveling. And moving on, we're going to talk about Trump and misinformation, but only a couple choice selections of Trump and misinformation, because we could spend the entire weekend talking about the 6.5 lies per day that the president tells. So let's go into a couple choice bits here. He's been very good at this, and this is something that he's been doing for decades. From The Art of the Deal, he wrote, one thing I've learned about the press is that they're always hungry for a good story, and the more sensational, the better. I play to people's fantasies. People may not always think big themselves, but they can still get very excited by those who do. That's why a little hyperbole never hurts. People want to believe that something is the biggest and the greatest and the most spectacular. I call it truthful hyperbole. Great. It's an innocent form of exaggeration and a very effective form of promotion. Now, back in the 90s, when Trump and Ivana were together, he had a public relations employee by the name of John Miller. Sometimes perhaps it was another employee by the name of John Barron. And he would often call reporters as Trump's PR representative from his Manhattan office. And this John Miller guy knew a whole hell of a lot about Trump and his personal life, and he was unusually helpful and very, very boastful of Trump and his activities. Then later on in a deposition in 1990, Trump actually admitted that sometimes he used those names as a pseudonym. So let's listen to John Miller, quote-unquote John Miller, attack Ivana after she did a Barbara Walters interview when they were breaking up and said that she would never get back with Donald Trump again. And you guys tell me if this is Trump. I don't think we have any audio.
What's she going to say? Is she going to say when he's with somebody else and has other people lined up, is she going to say, yes, I want to get back, I want to get back? She's a pretty savvy woman. And she's not going to say, I mean, he's living with Marla, and he's got 3 other girlfriends, and she's not going to say, I really want to get back, She wants to get back. She's told it to a lot of her friends, and she's told it to him. But it's so highly unlikely. That's off the record.
Yeah, that's off the record. Yeah, that was John Miller, everybody. So another little bit from John Miller.
A lot of the people that you write about, and you people do a great job, by the way, but a lot of the people that you write about really are, they call. They just call. Actresses, people that you write about just call to see if they can go out with them and things.
I mean, do you think that was Donald Trump? Yeah, I think so. I mean, the one thing that we can take away from this is that, he's always been this sort of erratic and disjointed in his speech. I mean, this is from decades ago, so at least we know this isn't sort of early stage Alzheimer's that we're dealing with from the president. This has just always been his fragile mental state. Again, when you think back to what he said in The Art of the Deal, he plays to people's fantasies. Recall back right after the inauguration, there was this nonsense about alleged voter fraud because he didn't win the popular vote. People were making a big deal of that. And perhaps he might have known that his presidency was a little bit more fragile than I think really the entire public knew at the time. Perhaps he had an inside track into some of that knowledge. So he created this Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. Chris Kobach was appointed to this and to investigate this massive voter fraud that he had publicly alleged happened that cost him the popular vote. Well, it was completely debunked. The commission disbanded very quietly, and nobody ever heard about it again. And remember this crazy scene? Look at all this paper from my lawyers. I've divested myself of my corporate interests. I'm no longer associated with the Trump campaign. I'm to the Trump organization. I'm the president of the United States now. They constantly pointed to the paperwork. They had a bunch of staffers in the room pointing, applauding, but nobody could ever really take a look at any of those papers. I mean, it could have been comic books in there. I mean, who knows? You just don't know. Now, to step back to the campaign itself and talk about some misinformation and misdirection with regard to the DNC hack, let's think back to this. So there was a false mouthpiece that was created, that the Russians created. They created the persona of DC Leaks, and they registered the domain name dcleaks.com. And when they did this because they knew if they released the information that had exfiltrated from the DNC, it would be seen as more credible coming from an independent third party. Well, what independent third party did they associate? They associated us, American hacktivists, American hackers. And in one sense, I guess we can be proud because the Russians perceive us as objective, but they used us to give them a veneer of respectability and objectivity. Not something we should be happy about. And after the DNC announced that this was actually Russian actors that were involved in the DNC hack, that was when they created a new persona of Guccifer 2.0, masquerading around as a Romanian hacker. And at the same time that they created that, Guccifer generated a blog post entitled, very directly, DNC servers hacked by a lone hacker, not the Russians. And Guccifer, when he posted this, he used sort of tags and keywords that would attract conspiracy theorists and the alt-right, things like the Illuminati and Deep State. What we also learned fairly recently, too, was that another source of misdirection and obfuscation happened with cryptocurrencies. And we know this from the penultimate Mueller indictment of 12 Russian nationals that was filed in federal court just last week. And in particular, at, I believe it's page 21, count 10 of this indictment, they mention that there was Bitcoin mining happening, and a Bitcoin mining operation also funded, through the same Bitcoin address, the purchase of servers and domains used in the GRU's spear phishing operations, including these typo squatting domains, accounts-google.com and account-google.com with 3 O's. And they also used a Romanian registrar to register DC leaks, but that's not mentioned here. So going on, I want to spend a little bit trying to explain to you why we started tracking things relating to the Trump campaign. We do some work with insurance companies at my law firm, and we were presenting at the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies in Chicago last year, 3 March 2017. The issue that we were addressing was, is there enough data to underwrite cyber liability insurance? And we were making the point that there's a lot of data out there, you just have to know where to pluck it. And so we needed an example of an organization that was facing a lot of DNS-based InfoSec threats, but was completely asleep at the switch. So we used the Trump organization. And what I'll show you now are some actual registered permutations of Trump.com that nobody really seems to be paying attention to. And these existed, most of them existed at the time of our presentation in 2017 when we first started looking at Trump's DNS records. So here's a couple of them. If you want to scroll through here, I mean, just about every single permutation. And if you take a look at the geographical locations of these domains, they're all over the place. But don't worry, there's more. There's a few more over here. I mean, seriously, there's just a lot of these. And actually, let me step back for a second. Don't get excited about these. These are just common spear phishing words that are attached to domains that we were tracking as well. But this is by no means an indication that that's the entire universe of domains that relate to the Trump organization. And here's a couple of my favorites. Even www.trump.com was registered, and nobody seemed to be paying attention to it. Some of the data below that is just based off a little script that I wrote because we do a lot of whois lookups on a daily basis. So I combined a little bash script with some GeoIP lookups and then piped it out to CalSay because that's fun. But if you take a look at this Chinese registrar, remember this creation date and remember this domain name because we're going to use it as a place marker. It is August 17th, 2015, and we're going to get back to it. So you combine that with lazy enforcement practices when it comes to policing the DNS. The last UDRP stands for Uniform Domain Name Resolution Policy. The last UDRP filing, which is a little mini arbitration that happens either in the United States, in Minnesota with the National Arbitration Forum, they go by the Forum now, or in Geneva with the World Intellectual Property Organization. And this is how people reclaim domains, organizations reclaim domains from cyber squatters. If you have rights to your name, you would file a UDRP complaint. Well, the last one we saw filed with NAF was in 2011, and it related to trumpinc.us. And if you look at WIPO's filings, the last filing we saw of the Trump organization reclaiming a domain name was in 2016, and it was a direct match of a trademark, Trump Spa. So they were looking to enforce their trademarks, and in fact, the complainant here, DTTM Operations, I would presume stands for Donald Trump Trademark Operations, which is the holder of the trademarks. They probably weren't even actually looking at the DNS for these particular types of squatters, because what ICANN instituted after the 2012 GTLD program was something called the Trademark Clearinghouse. So if you have a trademark and you use it in commerce, you can submit the string of that trademark to the Trademark Clearinghouse. Somebody registers a domain name, you'll get a notification that it exists. And so that, to me, signals that they were probably just getting indications from the Trademark Clearinghouse operated through ICANN when they found this particular domain. But again, that's the last filing we were able to uncover, and that's over 2 years ago, or actually just about 2 years ago. So we decided this was pretty much a dumpster fire worth tracking. So what we have developed internally inside our law firm is some DNS monitoring tools that we coded ourselves that give us really interesting insight and visibility into the DNS. We get about 400 million records daily. And develop some very unique ways of searching for threats and cyber squatters and permutations. And so, since we decided this was a dumpster fire worth tracking, we actually did. and we began tracking all 65,000 plus domains that contain the string Trump in them. And here's just some of the data. Kind of scroll through it. This is the beginning of our data set here. More, you get down towards the bottom of it, and we just started collecting a lot of DNS-related information there. And not surprisingly, we found some curiosities, like this one, trumpclub.ru. Does anybody want to hazard a guess what trumpclub.ru could be? There's got to be a brave soul here who has some idea. Porn site? Porn site? This guy is somewhat close. What could it be? What could the trumpclub.ru be if not a Russian escort service? There you go. Yeah. Moving on. The real president, Donald Trump. Anybody hazard a guess? You guys are a lot smarter than you look. Porn, straight up porn, absolutely. However, it really depends on how you characterize it. This could just be pictures of friendly, elderly gentlemen, kind of like the president himself. TheRealTrumpPtape.com. Anybody guess? Anybody guess? Okay, all right. Well, this one's pretty obvious. It's a Russian site with an animated P-tape. And if you translate the Russian there, it stands for, which is why you have the Russian eagles in the back, the official Russian Ministry of Indecency is what it is. So yes, that's the official site, therealtrumptape.com. But getting back to the heart of the matter here, we also found some interesting registration anomalies. To find anomalies, you have to find the ordinary registration pattern. So once you have amassed all this data, you can begin to filter and do some pattern recognition, some pattern matching. And this is what Trump's portfolio of domains generally looks like. They've got this associated with the whois data, general counsel at trumporg.com. So once we collected data on over 65,000 of these, we saw another unique pattern showing up. These, the Trump organization domain transfers at trumporg.com. Well, that sort of piqued our interest. And what we have here, frankly, is a little bit more laziness, because after the domains were transferred, nobody ever bothered to go back into the whois registration data and conform it to their usual pattern, because nobody would have ever been able to find these domains otherwise. So they didn't do that, they missed that last step. And we began to kind of have our interest piqued. So we looked out at the historical whois records for some of these domains, and we found some stuff that jumped out to us. So for instance, DonaldJTrump16.com was registered by a guy by the name of Justin Tribble, and he was associated with the Sedona Holistic and Natural Therapy Foundation for Greater Awareness. Kind of odd, right? So then we looked at DonaldJohnTrump2016.com, same guy, Justin Tribble, Sedona Holistic Natural Therapy Foundation for Greater Awareness. And we looked at DonaldTrumpRealTwitter.com, again, same guy. And we looked at DonaldTrumpTwitter.com, DonaldJ-Trump.com, Donald Trump's official Facebook.com. Triple. That's all it was, triple. So who is Justin Tribble? And that's where we go into the new chapter here, chapter 3, the curious case of Justin Tribble. This is Justin Tribble. He claims on LinkedIn that he's a professional chef, a master chef in all lowercase, in St. Paul, Minnesota. And this is his spiritual awareness center that he runs in Sedona, which is kind of like this weird, place on the planet Earth that has vortices coming into it. It's supposed to have psychic healing powers and other things, and I'm not really sure about it. But in any event, some interesting things jumped out here. Where dreams come true, find the essence of Tribble. We certainly are. And it sounded to me a lot like Mar-a-Lago in some sense, right? We only let certain people in. This is an exclusive club. I'm not in the business of just letting anyone in. You have to be spiritually ready to be here. I have literally not left the compound in 7 years. I haven't set foot anywhere else. I don't know how he's a master chef in Minnesota, but what this indicates is this guy, it really is, his whole life is this hall of mirrors. And then here's his pricing list. He can get a one-on-one massage for $335 from Tribble, if anyone's interested. And here at his retreat, they're looking for people who are ready for the next step. If you want to waste time in your little three-dimensional plane of existence, go ahead. But you won't be allowed in here. Actually, aren't we in a four-dimensional plane of existence anyway? Isn't time a dimension? Maybe that doesn't apply to Justin Tribble. So let's go in a little deeper here. Things got a little strange because Russia Today interviewed Tribble in 2012, and they flagged him in the television show as a blogger, as an activist, somebody with some credibility, and he had this interview that pertained to the Libertarian candidate Ron Paul. So if we could get some audio on this.
Calls themselves a Republican could say that they're against the Constitution, or that they're against limited government, or that they're against defending the homeland or defending our borders. And since Ron Paul supports all those things, it just baffles me that he doesn't receive more support. But I think it's because people just aren't informed. They just don't know. They haven't really looked at him. They haven't studied him. They have no idea.
Well, I'm also baffled, Justin. And here's another interesting thing, is that Tribble, when you look at him in his social media posts, he really seems to side with Russia on a lot of issues. Let's take a look at some of his posts. When this guy's doing more to keep the U.S. out of war than this guy, it's officially time to reevaluate. Another one. This is recent. Another chemical attack falsely blamed on Assad. When do the American people wake the fuck up? All right. Some more. Very recent. 13 days ago. I can't believe Trump didn't back up our intelligence agencies. What possible reason could he have for doubting them? Okay. And then here's one, a Twitter post from him right after Trump had let in the Russian delegation from their embassy into the Oval Office and then had disclosed classified information to them of the higher than top secret level. I believe it was TSSCI, and Tribble had then stated, Trump shared info with the Russians that would help prevent a terrorist attack. He probably saved lives. Okay, why not? But then a little more troubling is that he seems to have a lot of anti-Semitic inclinations. Let's take a look at this. This will be slightly offensive. So here we are, Justin Tribble, December 9th, 2017. And this is a quote that he's quoting. The Jews were depicted by Hitler as the greedy bankers and capitalist class. And then his comment is, maybe because that's what they are, with a little laughing smiley next to it. And then underneath that, I don't think Hitler was really wrong in his views. He fought in World War I. He saw what the Jews did to Germany. I mean, terrible. So, I mean, this gave me a lot less reluctance to call this guy out. When you're an anti-Semitic son of a bitch like that, it's fair game. So it gets a little, we want to have the audio up too for something coming up. This gets a little stranger here. His Facebook page, he's got all of his favorite celebrities over there. And he's also got this guy.
You've got what it takes. This is your moment. The promise is in you.
Yeah. Joel Osteen. Okay. A lot of people here may not know who Joel Osteen is, but there he is. We do have a lot of people that come here internationally, so they may not be very familiar with his Bible banging and Jesus preaching, but here's a 30-second version. He's an American televangelist, 20 million monthly viewers, found in 100 countries. We can listen to him right now if we wanted to on satellite radio because Sirius broadcasts him 24/7. He went to Oral Roberts and Divinity School, never got a degree, and became a very, very well-known preacher in Texas, purchased the Compaq Center, which was the home of the NBA's Houston Rockets. And he has a very interesting take on theology, which is this prosperity gospel or prosperity theology, which basically boils down to Jesus Christ wants you to be rich. He loves you if you're rich. And if you're rich, it's probably because you are a good Christian. So that, yes, material gain is the reward for all pious Christians. His net worth, he must be very pious because he's worth between $40 million and $60 million. And he lives in a 17,000 square foot mansion worth about $10.5 million. But something weird happened in 2013. He announced that he was leaving the Christian faith. And this renunciation of the Christian faith was reported worldwide. He basically said, many people want more answers and are asking why I did this, I have one simple response. I have come to realize my followers have begun to deify me and listen to me, and not God. This, among other reasons, led me down a path of awakening. However, this was literally fake news. Tribble registered JoelOsteenMinistries.com and created this particular hoax website for the announcement to garner the attention of Joel Osteen. In an interview, Tribble explained that he had issues with Osteen's prosperity gospel, and he wanted to get the attention of this man who was otherwise inaccessible to him. So let's listen to Tribble's own words, if we can get the audio up.
I didn't want to hurt the guy. I didn't want to shame him. I did not want it necessarily to get to this level. But now that it is, I want a message to get through to this guy. Tone down the cliches and get real.
Yeah. So there you have it. That's the whole reasoning there. So here's the trouble with Tribble. He needs to seek attention, and he becomes infatuated. It appears that he becomes infatuated with these celebrity figures and performs these hoaxes to get their attention. And these are the domains that he registered that we were able to identify with respect to Donald Trump. This list right here. Now, it's possible that he did this as some kind of altruistic gesture of preemptive domain registration, goodwill, because he liked the guy and he was a fan of him. And, nothing says I love you more than a preemptive domain name registration, right? Christmas Day, you realize, thank you so much, honey. All I ever really wanted was common misspellings of my primary domain name. This is great. This is the best Christmas ever. Highly unlikely, unfortunately. It seems obvious to us and hopefully to you that this guy was planning a hoax, but at the end of 2015, the scheme was identified and it was halted. And we know that Tribble ultimately transferred these without any form of legal process. There were no UDRPs filed, there was no lawsuit filed. He did this willingly. He was very likely contacted by the Trump Organization, which meant that they were watching this. And this raises some kind of serious questions, I think. How did they figure this out? How did the Trump campaign catch this? Because these registrations were quite literally a needle in a haystack. The signal-to-noise ratio was really tricky. It was not really in their favor. At the time of 2015, we think there were probably around 30,000 domain name registrations. So it would have been really hard to find this. And we know, based on those domains that we showed you earlier, especially www.trump.com, which was registered in August of 2015, that the Trump Organization was not really policing the domain name space of that system at that point. Because nobody was paying attention to things like this kind of nonsense, right? Now, this domain was registered exactly 2 weeks before. www.trump.com was registered 2 weeks before Tribble's domains were all registered. So when they were scouring the DNS for registrations that troubled them, they found these Tribble domains and ignored www.trump.com and other blatant InfoSec threats that were DNS-based. And remember that we saw that the only enforcement that that the Trump Organization was engaging in was to protect its trademarks and for ridiculous things like Trump Spa. So they weren't really paying attention to this. It must have been a third party working specifically for the campaign that did this. We don't, however, see any of the hallmarks of the usual organizations or corporate entities that police the DNS. The configurations of who is data, certain domains being transferred over to specialized corporate registrars. We don't see any of those hallmarks whatsoever. And remember, this all happened at the end of 2015. Trump wasn't really a very serious candidate back then. I know some people did take him extremely seriously, but it wasn't until well into 2016 that he became extraordinarily serious and dangerous. But somebody saw this, somebody competent saw it, researched it, identified it, reported it, and put a halt to what could have been a damaging hoax in order to get the attention of somebody with whom Tribble appeared to be infatuated. And remember that the only real digital competence that we saw was detailed in the Mueller indictment. But I'm not one to cast aspersions. Far be it from me to make any insinuation as to who was possibly helping him. And, but anyhow, all jokes being aside, if this was not some kind of foreign assistance, and this, unlike the election, wasn't won with the help of foreign assistance, this does say something rather interesting about Trump and his people and their capabilities. So what are some deductions that we can make here? Well, Trump does seem to be pretty incompetent at things like governing. He's really, really competent when it comes to the manipulation of information, because he's had over 40 years of experience doing this. We saw him doing this in the 80s, we saw him doing it in the 90s, you listened to him doing it through the voice of John Miller and John Barron today, and he has people around him that are similarly immune to the truth and willing to bend veracity for their own purposes, to sort of make up their own falsehoods, make up their own version of the world so that it becomes something that suits them. And another takeaway here is that there is a very big difference in skill sets, attention, and competency between the Trump organization and the Trump campaign, because we still see very little enforcement activity when it comes to the DNS and the Trump organization. It's almost as if they've thrown their hands up. And with an organization as large as the Trump organization and as public, sometimes that's what people do, and they just monitor for threats, but we don't really even see those hallmarks. But they're all very, very good. The Trump campaign staff is extremely good when it comes to information control and effective misinformation. They may get called out for their misinformation, but then that has become basically the 24-hour job of our news organizations, is to constantly call out the lies and the falsehoods, all of this misinformation. And as we all know from our day jobs, it takes a very competent attacker to make a skilled defender. So the point being here is that we need to be vigilant. We need to that it's wrong to presume that there is no method to the madness that we see on a daily basis. It's exhausting, but we have to pay attention, because we're warned by Orwell that these uncorrected lies will be passed into history and become truth. And that's a very dangerous situation. I think that's what we're facing right now. Thank you. So a little epilogue to the story. Through our law firm, we offer DNS monitoring, policing services, but that's not the point of this. We're also putting our technology that we developed for what we perceive to be, we're putting it to work for what we perceive to be the public good. And we're doing some interesting things. We're able to identify and report on all of the anti-Comey domains that were registered by the GOP. And our good friends over at Vice Motherboard ran an excellent story about this. That was kind of fun. And then we realized we had some interesting ideas, and well, let me take one step back. Yes, of course we are continuing to monitor all Trump domains on a daily basis, all new registrations. We're watching everything. We're carefully monitoring this space. And something that came out of doing Off the Hook every week with Emmanuel and Kyle and Firefly and Voltaire is we all get together afterwards, we go out to dinner and we talk. And during one of those conversations at dinner, Emmanuel and I were discussing, well, you developed this really interesting tool and you've detected these Comey domains. Perhaps we could begin to monitor the DNS for misinformation campaigns and smear campaigns as they relate to the midterm elections. So we started doing that. And we actually have a server entirely dedicated to monitoring the DNS for smear campaigns, misinformation campaigns, attacks against candidates. And we started this just a couple of weeks ago, and it's kind of mind-blowing what we've been finding already. We've already made literally hundreds of significant findings. We don't necessarily have a lot of time to go into those findings. I have a feeling that you will be hearing about them very shortly, perhaps Monday. And so keep your eyes peeled, guys, because some good stuff is coming. And that's it for me. So that's the story of the cyber squatter that scared Trump. I'm Alex Orbelis, and I'm here for questions if you have any. Thank you all for listening. Any questions? It's hard to see with the lights here. There's one guy. Okay, one unshy soul. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Good.
I'm all right.
All right. Well, I have to say it was a very good presentation, very specific, a lot of detail.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. I think you illustrated pretty capably that there is certain skills Trump may ostensibly be said to have, areas of oversight he's pretty good at. You might even say social or info hacking. It's kind of impressive, quite frankly. But I wanted to ask, do you view it as kind of coincidental or kind of interesting that the mainstream media in the U.S., which is not immune from political influence, I have to point out, and the so-called deep state, we call them these euphemisms, kind of Orwellian euphemisms like intelligence community. I mean, what does that mean, right? But anyway, and then you have kind of more independent-minded, kind of free-spirited hackers like ourselves, and do you have any comment maybe on kind of the interesting optics of having all those kind of line up kind of on the same page and kind of in the Trump overall situation with respect to Russia, which everyone knows is intervening and being a bad actor, but I'm interested to hear.
Sure. So is the question, if I understand it correctly, the optics of seeing this and not having the mainstream media report on it, things like that? Is that the question?
Well, no, kind of just having the general theme of it that there might be some foreign help, which really is frankly indisputable. It almost seems, if forgive me, almost a bit redundant, being the mainstream media or so-called Orwellian intelligence community, right? Those guys, which being a patriot, I happen to think in principle are very important to have. But kind of having it all line up to be on the same page, seems almost excessive to me, and I
Yes.
wanted to.
Yeah, I agree.
comment
And
on that.
this issue, I think you do bring up a good point too. Is there was some kind of strange issue with Alpha Bank and the Trump campaign, and weird DNS queries going back and forth, and nobody's ever really figured out what the hell was going on there. And that was sort of a dud of a story too. So it was a big story, but it never really went anywhere. Nobody was ever able really to draw any solid conclusions from these kind of weird interactions of various servers between Alpha Bank and the Trump organization. And so to an extent, I think the mainstream media could get tired out of that. They don't necessarily like to focus on the technical components of it, but I think they're getting better at it, and I think that's partly to our credit, because that means we're doing a good job of talking to them and educating them, and I think we have to continue to do that job, because all of this is going to continue to play an increasingly large part in misinformation campaigns, in election campaigns, and almost any major story or any major world event is going to involve information security. So another question.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to raise is that there's actually a very large community of folks that work on issues like this around ICANN and around the community that manages the global DNS. And so don't feel like you're the only person out there. There's literally hundreds of companies that are monitoring this kind of information. And if you'd like to participate, I'm more than happy to hook people up. But I think that you've stumbled on something that we've been working on for almost 20 years. There are crazy people out on the internet, and they like to register domain names because they're cheap and do funky stuff with them. And we chase this stuff down all the time. When law enforcement is going after a botnet, or when somebody's trying to figure out who is stealing their domain because they typo squatted it, it happens all the time. And it's terrible process, terrible legal process that ICANN has set up. But it is the process that we have. And if you want to participate and change that process, you can. That space is open to participate in, and the ICANN meetings are free to attend, although they are all over the world. And so my question for you is, what's your next one? What is the thing, you identified something, and how many of these things are there? You're monitoring all of the DNS now, right? How many are there? Can you tell us?
How many what?
How many of the instances of these typo squatting kinds of things happen? For instance, how often does this happen with hurricane names? Just last year, this happened a number of times. There were faults.
Yeah, I think I get the question. I think what you're saying. So yeah, this happens all the time, absolutely. And this is what we do. It's what other people do. We track these things. We monitor them. You and I were speaking about this yesterday as well. So look, the internet's a big place. The world is a big place. Weird things happen. We shouldn't just be throwing our hands up and saying, oh, well, there's crazy people out here. There's interesting stories to be told from this particular type of data. There are a lot of other companies that monitor DNS. We're by far not the only one. That's certainly true. But we're the only one talking about this, and we're the only one who came forward and talked about what we found with the Trump Organization. We're the only one that came forward that talked about what we found with the GOP and the anti-Comey domains, and we're the only one that has made a public announcement that I've seen so far that is using our own resources to actually monitor and track smear campaigns and misinformation and misdirection with respect to the midterm elections. So I like to think that we're a little bit different. But thank you for your question. Thank you.
Hi. Did you also happen to look at the DNS resolution for MX records, especially around the end of 20?
Yes, yeah, we track about 25 different data points, including NS records as well. Yeah.
Just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And, you know, they can get you so far. You know, sometimes you find some interesting things, and sometimes it's more the delta in the NS records that are interesting than anything else.
Yes. Well, the mail servers in particular just changed right around the end of 2016, which is just a pretty interesting move. And they went from a larger mail servers for Trump.org and for IJK Family, from things like Outlook and
Right.
IBH down to a boutique IT firm.
Yeah, that's true. So generally what we'll do sort of within our firm, so we provide this monitoring service, we identify these squatters, and then we, within the same shop, we take them down, we utilize the UDRP process, or, you know, if it's something more pernicious, if we start seeing NS records change like that in a pernicious manner, then we'll be the guys who'll collect that evidence and then relay the case over to the host that perhaps, if necessary, these domains should be sinkholed so that we can then begin to collect forensic evidence from them. So, 2 minutes.
Hi, we've got a couple of years left before we get back into the, you know, the presidential race. I was wondering if you brought this down to like the level of senators and things like that to see if there's anything going on at that level.
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing.
And have you seen anything yet? Anything preliminary?
Yes. That was sort of the last point of the presentation. We've made some very interesting findings there. We've actually even, you know, we take the advice of DHS. If we see something, we say something. If we think it's worth saying something, we've literally picked up the phone and called campaigns. And I will tell you that when you pick up the phone, you call them and you tell them about a recently registered domain that's being configured in a way that could be a spear phishing threat or a smear campaign, they're very thankful, because they didn't know about it. They weren't monitoring this in the first place. And so, you know, we consider it to be a use of our resources for the public good in doing that. Thank you. I think we might have time for one more question, perhaps, if it's a quick one.
Have you explored the interaction not only with DNS records, but I guess the implications on SEO and such along those lines about how these can lead to that and the spread of misinformation accordingly?
Not necessarily so much with SEO, a little bit with SEO, but it is something I would like to explore further. If you have any particular insight into that, come find us. We're down on the mezzanine level right upside the escalators. We'll be there, and I'll be here all weekend and all night, and I look forward to meeting all of you further. Thank you all for listening. I think my time is up. Thank you.